everybody, welcome back to Joygasm, where we chat about video games, movies, and pop culture. I'm Russ, Xbox Live Toaster 360, and absent, unfortunately, from the studio today is my brother from the same mother, Steve, Xbox Live Stevavitch, as I kick off episode 73 on this Memorial Day weekend of May 26th, 2018. On today's episode, we have a real treat for your ears. Special guest Jesse Snyder is here to talk about his career in the video game industry. He's worked on several AAA first-person shooter titles, as well as working for some of the top studios in the industry. We're lucky to catch up with him today. Mr. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Real quick, I'd like to give a shout out to Sean Byers, who made this initial introduction between us. I know before we started recording just now, we were talking about him, and so I just want to make sure I give him the props that he so rarely deserves.
Yeah, Sean's the man.
So I guess, would you like to start out by telling the listeners what you do and where you do it currently?
Sure, yeah. So currently I'm creative director at Daybreak Games, which is in San Diego. So SoCal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love SoCal.
Have you lived in SoCal your whole life, or?
No, I grew up in Oregon originally. And kind of funny story. So I moved to LA to get my first, game job, and worked at Gray Matter, a little studio called Gray Matter. And they made they were an old Activision studio that eventually we got merged into Treyarch, but they used to be known as Zatrix. So they made Redneck Rampage and, what else did they make? They made some other, Kingpin, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then Gray Matter, and then they got bought by Activision or whatever, turned into Gray Matter, and they made Return to Castle Wolfenstein.
Yes.
They did the single player. And so that was my this game's amazing. I was playing that game a lot in college, and I was like, this game's amazing. I love the team-based play for multiplayer. And I started modding that game. And so then when I started applying for game jobs, that was my first kind of, I was like, oh, I really want to work here. So that was, and then I ended up working there. It wasn't seamless. I had to, I did a phone interview and didn't get in. And then some time passed, and I was actually teaching high school at the time. I got my master's degree in teaching. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But then later they called me back and they're like, hey, we're going to start working on this new game. And I was like, all right, cool. Anything to get in the games industry, as a designer. And showed up and they're like, yeah, this game's called Call of Duty. No one really knows about it yet. It's
kind of tiny little game and no one really knows about it.
Exactly. And I was like, okay, and so we worked on the only expansion pack for Call of Duty. It was Call of Duty United Offensive. And then, so did that, worked eventually, we can go into more detail, but back to the original thing, SoCal, right? So 5 years of SoCal there. And then, was like, I really want to get back into the Northwest at some point, just because that's where I'm from. So that's why I went back up to Microsoft, worked at 343 for 4 or 5 years. And then I got tired of that and said, SoCal's pretty nice. What was I thinking? I'm going to go back there now. So then I went back to Activision and now I'm at Daybreak in San Diego. So I kind of just love it here. It's great. It's the weather's amazing.
Man.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm actually pretty interested in the whole teaching part of it. How old were you when you were teaching?
Oh man, I was fresh out of college. So, and then I was was that 21, 22, and then got my master's degree. So 23. So I think I was teaching around 23, 24 years old, somewhere in there.
And what precisely were you teaching?
I was teaching high school, which made it even worse.
Okay.
Because you can't see me or anything, and but I look really young, or at least I did. And a lot of people still say I look really young. So
that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing, except when you're being a high school teacher and, the kids don't respect you and the administrators are like, you should grow a beard. And I'm like, I can't. I just can't. So I had to do the whole shirt and tie thing. And, I was in lunch lines, trying to get, because when you're a teacher, you're like, I got to just get through lunch really quick so I can get back to my classroom and do classroom prep. And so they let teachers basically cut to the front of the line, and it's like an expected thing. So I would do that, and the lunch people would be like, what are you doing? You can't do that. You're a student. And I was like, I know I'm a teacher, So yeah, that was kind of annoying.
Trying to go to the bathroom, the hall monitors are like, what are you doing in the hall? And you're like, I'm a teacher.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The teaching was all right. It was, but obviously I like doing games a lot more, but it was rewarding in a different way, So
I think what I'd like to do is talk about how you got your start in the career? I know we've talked about the teaching bit. You've kind of mentioned a little bit about how you got involved with the gaming industry, but can you give us a timeline detailing what you did just from the start of the gaming industry, and then touch on the companies you worked for and the games you worked on for those studios?
Yeah, sure. Oh man. Okay. So we'll get in the Wayback Machine.
Yes.
So I always kind of go back to my mom, because when I was like 4 years old, she was kind of like an amateur computer programmer. And so we would they had these old, like back in the Atari days, they had like the Atari 800 was kind of like a PC. And so, and they had these books that you could, like magazines and stuff you could get. And in the back of those were these like programs. And so what we do is, like, when I was really little, she would, sit with me, and we'd like type in all the code and stuff and try to basically debug it, figure out where it went wrong and stuff. And so I kind of always like grew up around computers and modifying computers and like playing with software and stuff and hardware and whatnot. So, and then, I got older, I got into middle school, and, Bungie, I was playing a lot of Mac games. We never had like a PC. Like, we went from like Atari to like Mac, basically. I had Nintendo and stuff. And so I played a lot of Mac games, and, Bungie, Pathways into Darkness was one of the original game, like shooters that I ever played. And, eventually Marathon. And so, Marathon had like their modding tools. So I played, I started releasing mods and maps for Marathon on, like, I think it was AOL at the time, and like CompuServe and stuff like that. So, and then, I was always interested in kind of like, just modifying games, playing with games, and the idea of like putting stuff out there and having people play it. Like, I was in middle school, but like, in like, not a lot of people were doing this, but having people play your stuff and comment it online and not knowing who you were was just like, wow, this is crazy that I can do this. This is like pre-internet, right?
Right.
So then, time goes on. I decided, hey, I want to get into like computer science. So eventually I, went for my computer science degree, and kind of through school, there weren't like schools like there are now. Like when I was in college, it was a lot of, hey, if you want to be into games, you can take maybe like interactive media courses that were just starting, or you can go computer science and maybe become a games programmer. But they kind of pushed you away from that when I was in college. And so, but in the background, I was always like modding games, and I was actually doing more like level design work. So kind of professionally, I was trying to be like a computer programmer, and I decided that's the track I wanted to go. But in the background, I was just like modding games. And so that's when Return to Castle Wolfenstein came out. I was in college, started modding that.
Such a good game.
And yeah, oh dude, I love that game. It's like ahead of its time, I think. Like I look at like Overwatch now, and I'm like, that's basically Return to Castle Wolfenstein in a lot of ways. Like the kind of core map design is like, okay, we got these things we're pushing through the map, and I mean, they had crazier stuff where you could like set dynamite, so people had to play like certain roles to like blow open doors, and that was pretty fun. I used to play a lot of I guess it'd be considered pro league stuff back in the day too. Like there was like a league called like CWL. Anyway, so I was super into that game, and I was making maps for that, and I did the whole I made this map called like Kung Fu Grip, which was like a one of those shrunken world maps, and people love that and stuff. So and then what? So then got my, I was like, I started applying for game jobs, didn't work out. I didn't think too much of it, but people online were like, yeah, you should really keep going. You're making some really good stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, I don't know. So I just would apply to like small studios I thought I could get into, and never really got any callbacks or bites or anything, until eventually with Gray Matter. But kind of in between that, then I got my master's degree, and I taught high school. It was like less than a year. I only taught professionally for like 6 months.
Now let me stop you really quick. How old were you when you got your master's degree?
I think I was like, it was right out of college. So so it was like 23, 24, somewhere in there.
Dude, that's awesome.
It was like four years of CS, and I'm like right into, getting my one. Yeah, it was a 1 year master's teaching program. So, and then I went right into teaching, got a job luckily. And then, like I said, I was applying for stuff, and then then kind of I got a call that was like, hey, we liked your phone interview. We want you actually to fly you to LA. And, I'd never really left like Oregon in the Northwest before. So I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And and showed up in like totally like in my teaching attire, so like full like tie and like button up shirt, like everything.
That's such a big no in the gaming industry.
Oh yeah, they were like, "What are you doing?" Like they were like making fun of me. I was like, "Oh, I don't know. This isn't a professional interview. This is what I thought I was supposed to do." But well,
and it's funny too because like we had parents that I don't know about your parents, but like my parents were totally old school in that sense, where it was just when you go to an interview, you wear the suit and tie, you want to make a good impression. And it was just, I remember it was such an eye-opening experience how I learned all about what, corporate culture was about, like just in terms of just depending on which industry you're into. I mean, that could also be a detriment to you making a good impression. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was funny because like even to this day, people that I'm still friends with are like, I remember when you showed up in this suit and tie, and I was like, okay, but yeah, so came in for the interview and they were like really impressed because I'd like done my own like kind of terrible concept art, but I'd basically taken the Wolfenstein engine and turned it into a 2D platformer, and I recreated the like 1-1 from Super Mario Brothers, like with like full like scripting, like you could step on the turtles and all that stuff. So collect coins, like it was crazy. But you were like a Wolfenstein character, and so you could still throw smoke grenades, and you would like shoot, you could like shoot them with your Tommy gun and stuff, Thompson. So that was fun. So they liked they liked that I was playing around with it. And then so they put me on. When I showed up, because I was doing mostly multiplayer like levels, there weren't like a lot of single player mods back then. There just wasn't like the tools or documentation to do like single player content back then. So, so I was doing multiplayer stuff, and I made a couple levels. It's like this kind of famous level from United Offensive. It was like MP Foy, where I took one of the single player levels and turned it into a multiplayer level and made it all destructible and added vehicles and all this kind of stuff. And then one of our single player scripters got sick in the project, and they were like, "Hey, we need somebody with like computer science background, scripting background that can take over some single player stuff." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it." And so scripted the first level of United Offensive, and part of the second one, and kind of like a couple other sections of other levels, and shipped that stuff, and kind of ever since then I'd been in like kind of squarely in the single player realm, although. Like later I ended up doing I made Nazi zombies and all that stuff. So that was like a co-op mode. But so it's funny because I originally started as kind of this multiplayer person, and I would say mostly multiplayer games, I think. I play single player games and stuff and all. I play a lot of stuff, but I kind of tend to veer more towards multiplayer games, just like fun to, play competitive games. But I've always been working on single player stuff. So thinking about like how to do, layers of interaction and like all the mechanics and how they fit together with level design and all that good stuff. So
now what's interesting about what you're describing is that when you were working for Gray Matter, what was your job title when you first joined them?
Just designer.
Just designer. Well, what's interesting though is that it sounds as though that you were actually doing a fair amount of coding. Yeah, I mean, designers, like at least the designers I've worked with throughout my career, have all been able to kind of do it all. They've been able to write code, proficiently. They can do some, block mesh level design stuff. Some of them can take it a lot further and actually, do like ship levels. There's a lot of people that I, really respect. Still, like, they went to Respawn, and there's people that can take levels from basically, nothing to ship, writing all the code, for the level and doing all the like level design work and art. That's
maybe
amazing.
The artists will do finishing art, but yeah, it's and there's a lot of pride in that too, of like taking this whole thing, from nothing to, and seeing the vision through. Like, this is kind of the thing that I see. This is my level in a way. And it's a double-edged sword, because sometimes and especially with younger designers, people go like, "This is my level," but ultimately it's the company's level. You know what I mean? So
sure.
and usually you have bosses that kind of want to change things, and so you got to listen to them. But yeah,
I'm fascinated by that, just because the studios that I used to work for, the game designers to my knowledge, they really didn't do a lot of the coding itself. Of course, they were looking at more of like the gameplay mechanics and just doing more of like the level kind of like layouts in terms of like how different things would interact with like both the protagonist and just the storyline and that sort of thing. Like it was kind of more of a designer centric focus, I guess you could say. So it's neat to hear you talk about how you actually are very much hands-on when it comes to the code. That's pretty interesting to me.
Oh yeah, I think it might be a trait of like Call of Duty designers in particular, because the levels are very scripted, and the mechanics that are kind of working behind the scenes are all still written in code and script and stuff. And there's crossover, right? So like if you're writing like level design, like kind of code, you might say like, oh, I need this mechanic. Well, I'll just write it myself. And then, there it is, like I think of stuff like, like AC-130, like somebody had to, some designers thinking like, oh, I need to like put this camera up in the air and then write all the, gun systems and, all that kind of stuff. But they're also thinking in terms of like, hey, let me, figure out like what the look is supposed to be. Let me put the UI to make it look just like the what you'd see in like a real, like the flare cam,
sure.
That you'd see in like real war footage and stuff. So, that's it. I think it just differs between studios. Like, I come to Daybreak and it's like a mix of designers, kind of like what you're describing. Like some are like some of the level designers are like, hey, I'm just going to take these pieces that the artist made me and put them together and build a level. But, like I brought a couple people over from some other studios, and we tend to like to work differently, where we kind of custom build the level geo. So we're trying, there's a bit of a like back and forth there between like, hey, which way should we go? Because, there's one's efficient in one way and one's efficient in another way. And there's kind of drawbacks, so it just sort of depends on how people like to work and what's best for the kind of game that you're making.
Sure.
But Call of Duty is a pretty scripted shooter. And so all that script needs to be written usually by the designer. And typically the designer is the person that like comes up with the vision for that level, so maybe there's like, the creative director on a Call of Duty game will be like, here's the kind of outline for the overall game and story. They work with narrative and stuff. And they come up with like just the rough outline, and they say like, here's like what we think should be maybe like 10 to 12 to whatever, 20 levels worth of stuff. And then they kind of parse it out and say, you're in charge of this section of the game. Pitch us on what you think will be cool. And so the designer, even like the lowest level designer is like, cool, I get to go, come up with all these ideas. I'm going to do some research on that area. I'm going to kind of dig into the story a little bit more, get in the heads of the characters with it, like the narrative team. But ultimately, they're coming up with the vision for the level on their own, and maybe with a couple other people involved to like help support it, right? And then sometimes we pair off in teams of designers, and then they're responsible for taking that to ship. So, right, like I said, like writing all the code, doing all the block mesh, getting all the combat in, all that good stuff. And then eventually it gets kind of finished, right? Usually by finishing artists, and animators come in and make all the super sweet animations look nice, and they bring in the mocap and all that stuff.
But it just in terms of like the foundation itself, I mean, your DNA is totally ingrained into that game. I mean, that is super cool to know. I had no idea that you guys approached it that way.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yes. It's and then it's like talking to you and some other people go like, that's how you guys work. That's crazy. But that's all I've ever done. So to me, like anything else seems kind of like odd. I'm like, why would you,
why would you not do that?
What do you mean you're not writing code? Who's writing the code? Like who's like, you got to tell somebody to write the code. Like, why don't you just do it yourself? I don't know.
That's super cool. I totally did not mean to T-bone your timeline, but I just all of a sudden I was thinking about it. I was like, oh wow, this guy like has computer science. He has this whole background that I'm not used to hearing about. So anyway, please continue with your timeline.
Yeah. Well, I will say that like actually on the teaching thing too, one of the kind of most important things I got out of that was all the psychology classes, because then you start to really think about how other people think and how other people perceive different situations. And that becomes like super useful in game design, it turns out. So, but yeah, so, all right. So where was I? Gray Matter, let's see, Wolfenstein. And then, so we ship United Offensive, United Offensive comes out, does pretty well. And then we ended up getting merged with, Treyarch. And so Activision at the time was like, hey, we have this idea for doing like these yearly release, Call of Duties. And we're like, cause the first one ended up just going gangbusters, right? Mm-hmm. It was on PC and people loved it. It was very different, like, there's not a lot of games that kind of did shooting that way. Aim down sights wasn't a thing. And then in the single player side, you have like really good like AI squad behavior, which hadn't been done before. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a breakthrough game. So Activision's idea was let's take Treyarch, who at the time was kind of, they just come off some canceled games. and internally they were kind of struggling a bit, but they had a lot of console experience. And then Gray Matter had come off a successful PC game, and PC games weren't selling a whole lot at the time, and console games were, but we obviously we're a super talented team, so they figured like, hey, let's merge these two teams and we could do something awesome. So so then it was crazy because they kind of shoved a lot of us into the Gray Matter space, which wasn't made for it. And they're like, all right, we got a year. We need you guys to make a console game. And we're like, okay, how hard could that be? And they're like, and quickly as PC developers, we learned like the hardships of like, putting, I think PS2 had like 32 megs of RAM, and so so we made Big Red 1 in 9 months, and that was just a brutal project. Like we were just, crunching the entire time. It was pretty bad, but we had to figure out how to take a PC engine and somehow like fit it into a PS2, and we had to make so many sacrifices. Like we went from like, I think like 32 AI limits on PC to like, I think 8 or 12. And so a lot of the AI was just like faked, like super faked. Like, we called them like shrimps. And so they were just basically like like cards, like 2D cards in some places that we'd then swap in with AI at various points. And we did all these crazy tricks. So 9 months passed, and we, that was just a blur. I don't even remember what happened on it. Like people asked me like, oh, that was Big Red 1. I was like, dude, I was just working the whole time. Like, I have no idea. Like our pre-production was like weeks. Like we came up with those levels in, I think 2 weeks.
Were you sleeping underneath your desk at night?
Oh yeah. There literally was a guy that like, he had a mattress like under his desk. So it was pretty bad. And that's like the classic, like crunch, when you hear like the worst crunch stories, like it was that. It was like 14, 16 hour days, like, Monday through Saturday. And then like Sunday you might get off sometimes, but usually not. Like it was just bad. So that was a wake up call. I was like, ooh, that was different, and then Activision said, hey, so we need another one in a year because Infinity Ward wants more time to do theirs. And so they were giving, because at the time, like Infinity Ward was like the A studio and Treyarch was kind of the B studio. And so they were giving them like, 2 years and whatever to finish their projects out. And they were trying to get the schedule lined up, but, I can't remember the exact timeline, but I think COD II and Big Red 1 came out at the same time. And then they needed 2 more years to do, they were going to do another World War II game actually. And then there was a whole internal struggle about if they were going to do Modern Warfare or not. But anyway, so in that next year we had to do COD III. So
that's when I got on board the COD franchise.
Yeah. So that was like, that was another like trial by fire, just like use the same engine, like slam out another game. And again, it was like short pre-production, but, I don't know, like I like COD 3 more than Big Red 1. So COD 3, what did I do? I scripted it was the first level. Yeah. The tutorial level, it was like also like our kind of green light level and sort of our E3 behind closed doors demo level. And it was it was the what was it called? St. Lo mission. Yeah. And so that was like the one where you're in the truck and you're getting chased and a guy gets blown up behind you and then the truck tumbles over and then it's like you get dragged into this like cemetery with this full crazy war scene going on and it kind of goes from there. And it was like the big opening intro, right? And that was also like limited AI, like like a lot of those AI that you're seeing in the background are not real and stuff. So they're kind of just like shooting roughly in your vicinity, but they're not really thinking. And we had to do all kinds of little tricks on that.
Now, COD 3 was COD 3 the one where you had the storming of the beaches of Normandy?
That was, I think. Well, let's see. They did a beach assault level, but COD 2 was the one where they did like it wasn't Normandy. It was like Point du Hoc, it was called.
Yeah, there was one where in particular it was really cool looking where like you actually got to scale the side of the cliff and you're making your way up to where the Nazis are and whatnot. Was that COD 2 or COD 3?
That was COD 2. That was Infinity Ward's kind of big breakthrough Call of Duty that was the one that like broke open consoles because like in a big way, because that was next gen. Like that was like 360 launch title.
That's right.
And so it was like, ooh, like this, and they started selling like gangbusters at that point. Like, cause COD was already a great game, but then now you have it on consoles and it's like, it works because the 360 is kind of like a mini PC, and now you don't have to sacrifice as much.
Right.
And so then we were still doing COD 3 before that happened. So it was kind of like the last of the PS2, games. And then it was also, I think it was like a 360 game later or something. Yeah. And then, cause there was like a bit of crossover there. I'm trying to remember, but there was a bit of crossover too. And like PS2 was on its way out and 360 was on its way in. So we still had like this big install base and all that. And then, COD 3 was another just blur. Like, I don't really remember what happened. It was just like, hey, just get this game done and do your best work. And it was crazy, like I said, because it was like I was on all the green light demo stuff. So it was just like normal work under crunch situation times 10. So, there was a cool story there. Like, when I didn't actually get to see it, so I'm bummed, but they demoed the level behind closed doors. And at the time, Steven Spielberg was trying to do, I think he was working with Medal of Honor.
Oh,
and he had come by and saw my demo and was like, he saw it. And right afterwards he goes, yes. Like, he was like, why aren't we doing this? This is awesome. He was all excited about it. But, were
you present for that for his reaction?
I wasn't. And they told me about it afterwards, and I was like, I was so bummed. Like, that would have been great. But it was just like one of those things where I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, Steven Spielberg thought like I made a good Call of Duty level, so that's probably bodes well for me.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's like the ultimate compliment. In fact, Steven Spielberg is one of those types of people that it's funny. I from time to time will hear that he has some sort of vested interest in video games, but he's kind of on like the fringes or like the behind the scenes area. He's not very out in front. Yeah,
there's another buddy of mine I work with who used to work at there was a Steven Spielberg kind of game at one point at EA, and you could like look it up, but I think it's called Elemento, and my buddy actually worked on that for a little while. So I think he kind of worked in and around Steven Spielberg, and also like Steven Spielberg's son works in games. I think his name's Max.
Oh wow, okay.
You can check him out. But I think he was like a level designer at EA for a while. I don't know what he's doing now, but that was like years ago. So I think he's still in games. But yeah. So we shipped COD 3. And then what was next? And then World at War. So yeah, World at War was like, Activision's like, okay, you guys you get a break. You get 2 years. You don't have to crunch anymore. We're going to, back to normal making games. We're like, oh, okay, thank goodness for this. And so we, took some more time on pre-production and at the time we were kind of maybe thinking like we could pitch our own game. So we pitched some other kind of crazy games. Like there was a World War I game that was in there, and we pitched like a sci-fi game, like kind of like with robots and stuff, and kind of ended up being a lot of inspiration for Infinite Warfare, actually, at least on my end. But then Activision basically said, nope, World War II. So we're like, okay, all right, fine, we'll do it.
Like,
another World War II game. But we were
no World War II.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, okay.
We were stressed because like we were kind of seeing like the reaction to World War II games at the time, and we kind of knew they were on their way out. But Activision was just like, hey, these still make money, and we don't think that it's over yet. There's still fans for these. We're like, okay. So, and the big differentiator was like, hey, this is going to be set in Pacific Theater, right? So lots of water, flamethrowers, kind of a more ambiguous tone in terms of like, it's not so rah-rah, like we're going to win this. It's like, the Pacific campaign in World War II is pretty brutal on both ends. Like it was just Japanese on islands, like tying themselves up into trees and like, basically committing suicide, and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. The US side was doing some crazy stuff too, just mutilating bodies and going, going crazy and whatnot. So we wanted to kind of show that darker side without getting too much into it, too political or whatever about it. And so what do? We knew we were making a US, Japanese campaign, but then we were also like, well, people are going to want to see German, Europe stuff still. We don't want to just focus exclusively on that. And then what about the Brits? And so we actually had a whole British campaign that I think was like our best campaign. It was the most fun. Like we had levels that were like way ahead of their time in there. Like we had like the whole, and you've seen this in other COD games since, but like, hey, I'm going to, sneak my way into the base by like dressing up as other soldiers, right, and like, hiding under their car and doing all that kind of stuff. Like we had those levels like in production. They were pretty well along and almost done. And we had to cut the entire campaign, by decree of Activision, because basically getting back to my earlier point, I was like, hey, we need to have American Pacific stuff. That's like the core. And then people aren't going to, they're going to want to see Russian, some sort of Russian European type campaign as well. So we ended up having to drop the British stuff because it was kind of it was the most like the US allied side stuff. So that was a bummer.
Yeah.
But there's always stuff that, ends up on the cutting room floor and it's sad, but it's just the way it works.
Right.
And so the first year was kind of moving along and it was like, we were getting this feedback that the game wasn't like different enough than the previous Call of Duties. Like, yeah, we had Japanese soldiers, but they weren't doing anything different yet. And it was basically like, it felt like a mirror of the kind of German Russian campaign and the way the AI behaved and stuff. So, and then that's when the crunch burners got turned on again. And we're like, all right, let's try to make this game really good. And so we had to come up with kind of like new behaviors for the Japanese. So we really doubled down on like kamikaze, bonsai type behaviors, and they were like charge at you with their bayonets, and like I mentioned earlier, like guys are tying themselves up in trees. Mm-hmm. And the crazy thought behind that for the Japanese soldiers was, I know I'm going to die, so I'm going to tie myself up into this tree and just shoot them, shoot soldiers as they come on the beach and take as many out as I can. But because I'm tied up in this tree, they're not going to know if I'm dead or not. So they're going to waste their ammo on me and they'll just keep like laying into me.
Isn't that just crazy?
That's like it's a crazy mindset to be in for sure. So I can't. Yeah. So anyway, so we had to kind of reference that, we had soldiers that would like quickly run up the trees and then you could shoot them out. And then we had this like rope tech. And so then if you shot them out, they'd like fly, they'd like dangle down and swing. It's kind of like a cool, like, visual reward for taking them out.
Absolutely.
And stuff. And then we did like spider holes was another tactic that they used. So they'd kind of like cut little sections out of the ground, like little foxhole, and then they'd cover it up with like dirt and grass. And then they just kind of like pop up out of the ground and shoot you. So we try to do some of that stuff, but as you can imagine, like some of that stuff's really annoying, just like it is in real life. Like you're like these kind of guerrilla tactics aren't really like fun to, fight against. And so we had to do all these things to make them like, not annoying and whatnot. But
yeah, you got to have tweaking and balancing and figuring out like just how much to push versus how much to not.
Yeah. And then I guess the other big kind of thing was we were pushing for, from the beginning, we said, hey, this is going to be like a co-op campaign. And so kind of the first year was us just getting like co-op working, because, taking a step back, we were on the Big Red 1 and Cod III engines. And we right when we started World at War, we said, hey, let's not use this engine anymore. Let's move to the Modern Warfare engine. And so that means, the tech changes from underneath a bunch of programmers. They got to relearn some stuff. But then we also shifted that engine to be a co-op engine. And that's kind of where like really the code base from Treyarch and IW branched, because now we're adding like client-side scripting and like networking and stuff to like single player in like a more meaningful way. And eventually they added, like IW added their own like kind of, network, whatever, like scripting to, I think it was Modern Warfare 2. Cause they, what did they have? Those, I forget the name of the like co-op mode they had, but, anyway, so we had co-op scripting. That was a whole thing that we had to deal with in client-side scripting and versus like the normal server scripting or whatever, and basically trying to offload as much onto the client as possible. And so that was a new way for a lot of designers to think about making the game. And Call of Duty is typically a very scripted linear game, and so now when you have 4 players in there, they're like breaking all the events and kind of causing havoc and stuff. And so that was a big wake up call. So that was like the first year was us like that, learning that, and then so we didn't really get to all the other stuff we wanted to do. So then that's why we kind of had to crunch the second year and put in all the like the nice like I was talking about like spider holes and all this other stuff.
Now, what was the solution for that? If you have something that's 4-player co-op, obviously Call of Duty has a reputation for having those like cinematic scripted events that go on based on where the single player is at any given point in time. What was the solution for that?
So what we just kind of decided was we were going to forego a lot of the more scripted-y moments. And then of course we started getting feedback that there aren't enough scripted-y moments in it. Right. So, in a lot of cases, like you can just sometimes take control away from the player, which I absolutely hate doing, but you can't really do that in a co-op game. It just doesn't make sense quite often. And, we don't really have cutscenes. Kind of everything happens mid-level. Like if you're having some story beat, it's like, the AI kind of stand around and tell you some stuff, and then you move on. So, you know, we still did that. But
obviously in a game like Halo, they typically will have something that, like for instance, like they'll have a key, like if you walk up to a console and you press a button, then that'll execute some sort of cinematic or something. And that way it keeps it simpatico with having like a 4-player co-op experience. Is that something that you guys also used as a part of the experience, or did you guys have something that was fundamentally different?
No, I mean, we basically said, like, you know, this is Call of Duty. We don't want to like go into like cutscene, you know, and it's tough with cutscenes, right? Because you really need like a quality team that's like focused to make cinematics.
Right.
And we just didn't have that. You know, we weren't making it and we hadn't planned on it. So,
well, plus COD was never really known for that anyway. COD's always been known for like, you are literally taking part in like the said quote unquote cinematic where it's much more interactive.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we did some like gameplay tricks, right? Like we would do stuff like, you know, like we quickly found out that if you have 4 players shooting at AI, the AI just get destroyed, you know, like you can just hot knife through butter this game. So we would do little tricks like spawn extra guys. We would turn down the health timers and like the recharge, you know, shield timers on the players and stuff, based on how many players were playing. We'd up the accuracy on the AI and to kind of help balance it out, but it still never got to the point where like it felt like, hey, if I'm on veteran with 4 players, it was actually like hard. Like you could just rip through that game. And I think at one point it was like too frustrating and we kind of dialed it back a bit. Maybe we patched it out later, but yeah. So one of the other things that came up though is like, hey, there's just not enough of these like kind of core cinematic like levels that are like these single player experiences. Like they didn't translate well into co-op. So we ended up making a batch of straight up single player levels that, you know, in terms of like getting achievements and stuff, you didn't have to like beat them to like get all the like game completion achievements. But that always like seemed like a really like kind of weird solution to me, because you're like playing through the game and you're playing through the story, and if you're playing with your friends, like you would just not have certain levels like play, and so you're like, that was weird, and you'd have to go back in single player and play them kind of by yourself. So I think there was like one level that was like kind of, I think it was inspired by like Enemy at the Gates. Where there's like a scene where like, you know, you're supposed to time your shots with like the, you know, bombs going off or something. And so we did something similar where like there's like planes flying overhead and you had to like time your shots with like planes flying overhead. There's a very like kind of snipey, like stealthy level. But it didn't ever work in co-op. So we just ended up making it a single player level. And there was another one that was you were in, I think it was called like Black Cat, and you were in this like airplane, and kind of the DNA up to that point is like every level that like Gray Matter guys had worked on was like had some sort of airplane level in it. So you were like in UO, it was called Bomber. You're in like I think it was like a B-17 maybe. And you were on the side guns, shooting out at planes and stuff. And you were moving from like turret to turret, and they were blowing parts of your plane off and all that. So there was a level like that called Black Cat. And I think you ended up landing in the water because, hey, it's Pacific level. So you got to like land in the water, right? And then, you know, you rescue soldiers that were like trapped in the water, and you like fly off and do it again. So, yeah. So let's see. Yeah. So like, it was kind of just like, you know, we were trying to make this core co-op game, and people liked it, but then people were like, hey, we kind of missed some of these single player experiences. And so the creative director at the time said, we're just going to make some single player levels and throw them in there. And that didn't make the design team too happy, but we just kind of said like, all right, let's just do it anyway. Yeah. And then, and then it gets into like, you know, the end of that project is where things, I'm sitting here thinking like, I don't know if this game's going to be that good. Like we tried all these things. I don't know if they're going to pan out. Like, and then, you know, somebody came to me and said, hey, we need an extra mode. Kind of like Modern Warfare has this arcade mode where, it's like the third mode, right? It's like you beat the game and you can like run around and you can shoot guys and get points, and you can turn on these different like, you know, filter effects and stuff like that. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. And I'll think about it. And then, you know, this gets into like kind of like the zombie stuff, right? Where eventually I was like, hey, let's do like a tower defense game. Like tower defense is hot right now. It's super fun. And I think around that time, like iPhone had just come out, you know, so it wasn't like mobile phones were like like mobile phones are out, but it wasn't like iPhones and touchscreens were a big deal yet.
Right.
So most people were playing these games on like PC, like Flash and stuff. So, one of the other, like another producer was like, hey, I have this idea. It's called Bunker Defense. And so basically that design was basically you're just running through levels that had already been made, and guys were just getting like kind of increasingly harder. And I was like, that's not tower defense. Like tower defense is you're in one spot and you're defending it. And then what's coming at you is getting increasingly harder, and you're building up your defenses and seeing how far you can get, kind of thing. And so I was sitting at my desk one day and I was thinking like, I was like, there, like I had these animations in the, cause I did the beach assault level from World at War, like it was called Pelelu. And that was done like really early. Like that was also like kind of our green light, like early, demo, like let's get this game made kind of thing. And the thing that always stuck with me was I had these like Japanese soldiers that like were on the beach, and you do this like naval bombardment mechanic, and you kind of, hit the beach and it kind of clears it out, and there's this bunch of destruction. And then as you come up over the hill, you see all these like Japanese soldiers like stunned and kind of like walking around and shambling. And I was like, oh, this looks like zombies. This is crazy, And that was like a year before I'd even thought about like making zombie mode.
But that was the moment where like it planted a seed in your ear, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, so, and I'm playing the level every day, right, and like making it better and stuff. And so I'm watching this and I'm kind of thinking about how funny this looks or whatever. And then it was like, hey, we need this extra game mode. And then by the way, we it's like we have co-op, right? So I kind of had this like epiphany moment where I was like, oh, like what if it were Nazi zombies? It was like literally like that. I was just like, whoa, like, and it all kind of like came together in my head really quick. And then I told some people about it, and I was like, yeah, you could do like, these tower defense mechanics. And, one of my other buddies who works at Respawn said, hey, you should check out this game called Last Stand. It's this like flash game, and you're basically like fighting against zombie hordes in this tower defense thing. And I was like, oh yeah, this is perfect. So, and I was sitting there thinking like, oh, you could do, this is going to be great. Like you can do it all in first person, and you can have it all be immersive and kind of in the moment, like Call of Duty style, but it's tower defense. And, you can take the guns away from them. And so you can really like take your time to like get the shots on these guys. And we have dismemberment, so it works for zombies. And so I was kind of explaining to some people, and they just thought I was going crazy. Like I just lost my mind. Like, what is, like, he's been crunching so much, and poor Jesse, like he has, no idea what he's talking about anymore. Yeah. And meanwhile, this bunker defense game mode's getting made. And I'm like sitting here going like, we need to do something about this. Like this isn't going to be good. So I just started making zombie mode in my quote unquote spare time, which amounted to like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 a.m. on like Sundays. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Like, because we were like in alpha basically, or yeah, I think around alpha when I started working on it, which is, close to ship. Let's see. So that might've been like, I don't know the exact date. So we shipped in November. So maybe like, let's see, maybe August, September, November, maybe like not October, but maybe August or September. I don't know. It's hard to say. It was really late. Like, I mean, we only worked on it for a couple months, and then the game shipped. So
wait, you only worked on zombies for a couple of months? Yeah.
It was like the game was like getting wrapped up, and I mean that's why there's only one level in it, and that's why the mechanics weren't like fully developed, and all that good stuff. But yeah, so it was a very short production, and it was basically just me at first kind of prototyping it, and I pulled this like house out of one of the Russian campaigns, and I used that as my first like test bed where it was like a 2-story house, and I was like, okay, let's test out like zombies breaking through walls, coming in through windows, and kind of using the dismemberment that we already had. And I was stubbing in animations. Like I used the animations stub-ins from my level. And then it was like, we didn't have like zombie animation tear down stuff. So like guys were just using their like rifle butt melee animation to like knocking down windows and stuff, but it got the idea across. Mm-hmm. And people started looking at it, and they're like, whoa, this is like really cool. This is fun, because we were playing it in co-op. And, at the time, like nobody had been doing anything like that, where you were like, I don't think Left 4 Dead was out. I don't think Horde mode hadn't come out yet for Gears of War. So people were playing this, and they were like, whoa, this is like a brand new game experience. This is crazy. And then, the point was just to see how long you could live, right? Like tower defense. So people were super into it. And then a bunch of other team members just started helping out. They started pitching in. It was like, hey, what if I made you some new zombie art? And I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome, man. And hey, what if I made you, eye color, variations? I was like, yeah, it sounds great. So I was just kind of jamming stuff in, and you know,
I have this
but at the same time, what's that?
I have this total mental image of you, like, you know, you're working like crazy, feverishly at your desk, and like just some random person comes by and goes, what if I were to give you some textures for that? And you're like, oh yeah, that's fine, great. You keep working, and then all of a sudden someone else comes by and just kind of, what if I were to the whole time it's like that
happened. It was, you know, and you know, Activision, you know, kind of production and stuff wasn't super happy about it, like Treyarch production, because, you know, they were like stressed that the game wasn't going to get done, the core game, right? And I was lead designer on that game, so here I am, like lead designer, you know, trying to get the game out the door, but at the same time I'm kind of working on this like clandestine, like underground, you know, skunkworks project, and people are adding to it, so that's stressing them out even more. And like, why aren't you guys like, you know, finishing the art for the core levels and stuff? But it was like a project of passion, right? People just kind of could tell that it was fun and different and new, and there was something there. And so, yeah, you know, we kept working on it, and then another guy was like, hey, you know, and I can't remember if I went to him or he came to me, but he was like, hey, I got, you know, here's this section of this level that I want to use for the main map. And that ended up being the Knocked map. That was like the one that shipped. And that guy works at, his name's Christian. He works at Respawn now, but, he made the original map, and he just basically cut that section out of his, he had a Palelu level as well, which was like this airfield mission. So if you go back and play the airfield mission from World at War, you'll see that the Knocked building there, but you can run around in it and stuff. But so then we took that and kind of adjusted it a little bit, made some tweaks and stuff, and you know, started putting in the, you know, where we thought like the flow was going to be of like locking areas off and like holding you in one area, and then you know, having to open up other areas with you know, like shooting zombies and getting points and kind of spending those points to open up more stuff. And yeah, it's just straight up tower defense mechanics, really. And then it kind of like it was interesting because they told us to stop working on it, and they said we're like, stop, just we got to finish the core game, and they were like, you know, pretty upset about it, and we're like, okay, we'll stop working on it. And like a week or two went by, and after that they were like, all right, we're going to ship this. It's too good. Like they were like mad. They were like mad at us. They were like, we don't want to ship it, but we're going to ship it. And okay. And they didn't want me working on it as much. So I kind of took like a more background role, and another scripter who works at IW, his name's Mike Denny. He finished it out and added kind of all the polish work, and really like it was kind of the reason it got finished. And yeah, and then it goes out the door, and you know, turns out, you know, people really liked it, and I was kind of surprised how big it ended up getting. Like that was kind of the craziest part for me, has been like kind of, because, you know, I walked away from it, right? And you know, we can get into that bit too, but I walked away from it, and then it really took off. So when I went to apply at 343 Industries, which wasn't 343 Industries at the time, it was just like a Halo internal studio, right? But, when I went there, they were like, what's this zombies thing? Like, okay, whatever. You worked on Call of Duty. That's all that we care about. Okay.
We'll check mark that little box. COD. Okay, yeah. You're hired.
Yeah, pretty much. So, yeah. I feel like I should stop and you should ask some questions. Like
this is great, dude. I'm just letting you go. Cool. All this stuff is just fantastic. Yeah, no, I suppose what we could do, just because since we've been talking about the zombies portion of it, we can pivot a little bit just based on something that happened recently, which was that you revealed on Twitter recently that Treyarch had changed the origin story regarding your efforts on Call of Duty. Can you share with us what all that is about?
Yeah, sure. So like, this is a thing that just happens, and like I've been part of this even, and I kind of feel bad about it, but like when you're at like a major studio, they get to tell the story that they want to tell, right? And whatever sounds the best for PR reasons or marketing or whatever, right? And you know, ultimately, games are like an entertainment product, right. And so, and I always tell people this. It's like, he's like, yes, Treyarch made it because I was working at Treyarch when I made it. So technically, Treyarch made it, right? Like that's just how it is. Like that's the company I was at. They own it. Like they own the IP. It's all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and that's kind of what you sign up for when you work at a studio. But so, you know, and then in the past they've said some stuff, and I kind of just like, they'll change little bits of the story here and there. Like one time I read that people were working on this in their free bits of lunchtime, and I was like, that's totally like maybe a few people, but that's not how it really was, man. We were there till like crazy hours doing stuff. But Yeah, so they kind of get to tell their own story, and that's all well and good. But when like kind of really key components start changing, so like the last thing I saw was I read this article, Polygon posted it, where they said that what did they say, that the original map was some random engineer or something, and there are a few other kind of inconsistencies there, and it started to get to me because the more that the more companies tell the story and it gets away from the truth, it kind of like belittles, what people actually, when they actually did the work, it like takes something away from that, and it's not even like I'm saying like, hey, you should credit this person's name directly. Like it's not that. It's just like, just make sure that when you're saying like who did it and how it came to be, that it actually like makes sense based on reality. I don't know.
You want to give credit where credit is due. I mean, like a studio like that was able to monetarily benefit from this great idea that you had and that other people contributed to. And you want to make sure that just, once again, it doesn't cost anything to pay the proper respects to the person who actually came up with an idea.
Yeah, I think that's what maybe bothers me the most about it is like, all right, so the company, profited from it. They continue to profit, and that's fine. But like, the only thing that the designers and the people that worked on it like can take away from that is, if they've left or whatever, is the fact that they were there when it happened or that they worked on it, And so when that gets taken away, that's like, now there's nothing left. And, a buddy of mine, he kind of said it the best. He's like, now imagine you're going for some job and you say, hey, I made this like wonderful feature for this game, and they're, and the companies that you're trying to apply for is like super excited to hire you for this thing that you did. And you can like explain everything about it. But then they go and read an article that says you have nothing to do with it, or that's like completely different than your story. They're going to maybe pause for a second and they might ask some questions, which is fine, but there could be conflict internally, within the hiring managers, like, well, we don't know if we believe him and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yep.
And now that can like hurt people's futures. Right. And that's where I'm like, I start to draw the line. And that's where I come out of the woodwork and I go, like, you guys can't say that stuff. You gotta fix it. So, I've been pretty quiet about all this stuff. I mean, people that work with me know, like, I went to Infinity Ward and I didn't, they made a zombie mode. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't even talk. I like barely talked to anybody on that zombie team. And that's purely just because of my kind of work ethic or whatever, creative kind of ethic, where I kind of feel like everyone that's creative needs to have their own space to like define their own vision. Sure. And it's, you don't want people like interfering with that. And so I kind of sense that I could be a political lightning rod or something, if I were to come over there and say, well, that's not what I would do if I was making zombies, even though I made it, but that's not what I would do, And so I just gave them their space and they kind of did their own thing, and that was cool, and I had like tons of other stuff to do on the campaign side of Infinite Warfare anyway. So it wasn't like I really wanted to do that, but
well, and I think that's a mature approach to take. I mean, I think that when you work in any industry, and the gaming industry is no different, I mean, it takes a certain level of mature constitution to be able to look at something like that and be like, you know what, it's a really neat notion to just understand the fact that you're the one who was part of the OG group that actually spawned this whole zombies mode, and the fact that you can just it's almost like passing of the torch, right? Like you just pass it on to the next group and be like, here's where we started. I'd like to see where you take it and run with it, and who knows, maybe they'll have other ideas that will build upon the foundation that you guys actually cultivated, and that's also can be a very positive thing as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's interesting because I get like kind of emotional when it comes to games in a way, like when the games I've worked on, like I typically don't like to go back and play them. Because I think about sort of all the problems that I still see. Like I was like, oh, we never fixed that, or, whatever. And all it's tough. Or B, it's like, hey, I remember when this guy said this thing to me and it upset me, or, hey, I remember when, like this other guy flipped out because he was crunching too much, you know what I mean? So, it's like, I have this kind of different sense of the games I've worked on. It's really hard for me to go back and play them. And so even with the zombie stuff, like when I walked away from it, I think I played Black Ops 2 Zombies, and I kind of have dove in slightly into some of the other ones, but for the most part, I'm like, oh, cool. People still like zombies. That's awesome. And I'll maybe watch some videos and stuff, but I tend to stay away from it just because, you know, it just brings up all those memories again. And it's like almost like PTSD or something, you know? So
I have some of those as well. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think that for most people who work in the industry, there probably is something kind of similar to that. And actually, I think the movie industry bears some of those same parallels as well. Because I have some friends who work there where like I actually just recently I called up a buddy of mine who worked on Avengers. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that movie was so good. And he just totally geeking out about it. And he was like, oh, thanks, man. Yeah, that's cool. And I was like, what? Why are you not as excited as I am?
Yeah, it's a whole different mindset.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and he kind of alluded to that too. I mean, he told me some things about just some of the politics, office politics stuff that was happening. And so like, it does kind of change it, I think he still enjoys it, but there are certain things obviously that cause more of I guess more of a tempered response as opposed to just totally geeking out over it. But anyway, sorry, I totally I was totally in line with what you were saying there.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, like, it's funny too, like as a creative person, like I always think like, what's the next thing, So like I try not to dwell too much on like what has been done, I want to like always innovate and create something new and try different stuff. So, it's funny. It's like one of my like favorite like family stories is my dad. Like he's an artist in Oregon. He's a retired teacher, but he's an artist and stuff. But in the 90s, he made a couple fonts that became really popular. One's called Marker Felt. Another one's called Snyder Speed. And so he used to do like shareware and stuff. And he released them out, in the public, and people would pay him like $10 and we get these checks that show up every once in a while. And then one day, so like cool. Apple, it was cool. But then one day Apple sent him a letter and they're like, hey, we'd like to license your fonts, to be in like OS 10. And he's like, okay. And so they paid him some money. And so Marker Felt showed up in OS 10, and I think it was like on the first iPhone and stuff. And like now you like see, like I walk around, I'll go to the store and I'll see like his fonts everywhere, and I'll see like, oh, there's Snyder Speed. Like that's my name, like that's cool.
That's so cool.
And you could like check these fonts out. And it's like, yeah, it's my dad. And he's just like this, old retired dude, like in Oregon or whatever. But so like later in life, he does a lot of like painting and mixed media arts and sculpting and stuff. And he was like, hey, you want to do my website? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so I was like, yeah, do you want to put your fonts and stuff on there? You're really known for that. And he's like, no, I don't do that anymore. So I was like, okay. Wow. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's just like, I just want what I'm doing now so people can see what I'm doing now, because that's all I care about. Like, and so I've always kind of taken that away from him, is like, that's how I treat a lot of creative endeavors. And it's just like, yeah, like zombies happen and that's cool. And like, I'm proud of it and I'm glad it happened, but I also don't like really dwell on it that much. And people that work with me know I don't almost ever bring it up. And when I introduce myself, typically I'm not like, I'm the zombie guy or, whatever. Right. I'm just like, I just like, I'm, doing what I'm doing now. And if people want to talk about it, that's fine. But I got other things to try to make now. So
has Treyarch actually reached out to you since you were talking about that on Twitter?
No, I don't. I mean, it's interesting because I've talked to some of the other people that were there at the time, and we've kind of commiserated about stuff, and there might be a correction soon on the Polygon side coming up. We'll see, but I mean, Treyarch's. I'm sure Treyarch's got their hands full with like, I think they just released or revealed their game, and people are excited about that, and they're it's a big juggernaut of a studio, and there's a lot of fans out there. And so they probably don't want the distraction, and, B, probably don't care that much about, if it gets corrected, it gets corrected and they'll just move on or whatever, I'm sure. But
yeah. A couple other questions regarding Call of Duty. So you obviously have worked on a number of COD titles here, and I just kind of want to pivot a bit to
sure.
What is, it's always fun to hear about these kind of like coming of age stories as it applies to AAA titles. And for you, I mean, Call of Duty is just, it's the creme de la creme. It's one of the top series of games in gaming as a whole. And obviously when you're working with the team and you're doing what you're doing, you've got to have a moment where you sit back, like once a game goes gold and you're sitting back and you're watching just how successful it's becoming. What are like kind of the psychological reactions that not only you alone, but also just collectively as a team? I mean, what was, obviously you guys were excited. I mean, that goes without saying, like, oh wow, yeah, okay, we're going to make lots of money. This is great, blah, blah, blah. Like what, but I'm just curious. I mean, what was your kind of like lingering reaction to the overall success of the series?
Oh yeah, it's crazy, right? Because like I said, like when I started, I was thinking I was going to work on like Wolfenstein, and then they were like, "Here, take this Call of Duty thing that no one knows about," and we're like, "Okay," you know. And so that kind of set the tone maybe from the beginning, where I was never like super impressed by Call of Duty. Like it's funny because I love Call of Duty. Actually, I like to play it. I think it's like a great shooter. It's super fun. And like I said, it innovated in all these ways. But at the time I was like, man, I really just want to work on Wolfenstein, you know? So that was kind of like funny, but,
Bethesda, if you're listening, you heard it right here.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like when they redid like Wolfenstein, I was like, ooh, this is really cool. Like that was a really fun game, but, and the narrative and stuff. But, yeah. So then, you know, it's like I said, then it's like Big Red 1 and Cod III. We just like slammed through those and we didn't even see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it was just a blur. And like literally when I took, time off after Big Red 1, I just played World of Warcraft for about a month straight. I didn't leave the house. I was just like, oh my God, I get to play a video game. Like, you know, Warcraft is out now. Like, I'm just, and so, and I'm pretty good at like shutting out media, I guess. And kind of as a habit of just working in Call of Duty, like typically people don't want, either you just can't do it because of NDAs. You can't talk about like things that happened and all that kind of stuff. And so, I try to like stay away from a lot of the reaction stuff. Like I'll read a couple articles. I'll maybe look at the Metacritic score when it's done, but, it's funny because if you get too far into that, you'll drive yourself crazy because you'll see like, people will say things that you agree with, or you're like, because they might be like, oh, this feature is really awesome. And you're like, yeah, that was me. And I told that guy that, we should have done it, or, vice versa. Right. And so it can play like mind games with you, or they're like, oh, we didn't like this thing. And you're like, why didn't they like it? It was so good and everyone else likes it, or, whatever. So I just try to stay away from that stuff as much as possible. But kind of just, thinking about like reactions, it's always nice because, when it comes to gaming, like Call of Duty is ubiquitous. So if you're talking to people about games, it's like, oh, hey, my son plays Call of Duty, and you're like, yeah, I worked on that. And they're like, oh, cool. And what's funny is it can go one of two ways. Sometimes people are like, oh, that's really cool, tell me more. But more often than not, they make the joke. It's like, oh, well, you're taking his time away, whatever. Like they're almost like mad at me for making the game. Or like, oh, we had to ground him and we had to take his Call of Duty away or whatever. So
they start pointing a finger. Oh, so you're the one that's bloody. Yeah, you're like, yeah, oh yeah, exactly. That's me. Yep. Have you ever walked into a GameStop where like no one knows who you are, and all of a sudden you just kind of go, yeah, I worked on that, and all of a sudden you see everyone's like eyeballs get all big, like, and they treat you like an Insta celebrity.
Yeah, like I'm one of these people that I don't like a lot of the kind of attention around that, because I got a wife and a kid, and like, sure. I don't want, it's like you hear people like getting death threats and stuff, and I'm just like, all right, well, I don't want to be part of that. So, right. So I don't advertise it very often, but what it's fun is like just, it's like I'll walking around going to GameStop, and people will be like, oh, the new Zombies is out. And I'm like, yeah, it's cool. Like I made that. Yeah. Or, or like, oh, this new, this Call of Duty's cool or whatever. And you just like hear them talking about it, same thing on Halo. When I worked on Halo, it was kind of fun to hear, it's always fun to kind of be anonymous and hear people talk about stuff that you worked on in like a, generally in a positive way. And, you can feel good about that, but it's not, it's not like I want to be like, boom, I made it. Yeah. What now? What do you think of that? And then they're like, oh my God, I tend to like
kiss live the royal hand, if you wish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep. I live the more quiet life, so I kind of like to keep it that way. But here I am doing a podcast. Just kidding.
Another question I love asking, and this is just a great one for folks like yourselves who are game designers, but Were there any gameplay mechanics that you wish you could have added into any of your Call of Duty games, or by the time that they were released? I'm assuming there must be something that you were thinking, oh, it'd be so cool if we could add this.
So let me think about that. There's like when we originally did Zombies, I had planned for you to turn into a zombie after you like died, and then you could like attack your friends and stuff. And we actually had it working, but we couldn't polish it in time, and so that was one of the things that like got cut. But I think in hindsight, that was probably better. I think they added it in a subsequent like Treyarch game, but I never played it, so I don't know the details around it. But because it kind of what ended up happening is I thought about it afterwards, and it kind of went against like some of the core design tenets I had, which was like when you're playing co-op zombies, that everything betters the entire team. So there's no like competitive. There's nothing that gets like makes it feel competitive in any way. So like if you pick up like one of the power ups, it benefits everybody in some way. So that was one, but again, like that was kind of like, I'm probably glad it didn't make it in. So when I left IW, I can't say what it is, but I came up with this mechanic, and somebody else actually ended up implementing it, and I'll be curious to see if it actually makes it into the next IW COD game.
Mm-hmm.
But
I like how you said that. You're like, I'm Ron Burgundy.
Yeah, I'm like, I hope it makes it in. But but I'm trying to like be careful because I don't want to get like sued by anybody. But
yes, we definitely do not want you to get sued by anybody. That'd be counterproductive.
So I'm trying to avoid all that stuff. But if it makes it in, I'll be like, you can call me up or whatever, and we can do another one of these when their game eventually comes out.
Sure,
we can talk about that, and I can tell you which one it is if it's in there. But that's one where I'm like, ooh, this could be like a game changer kind of mechanic. So we'll see. I don't want to give too much away. I keep stopping myself. So
I'm just letting you talk.
Actually excited about it.
Keep talking as long as you want, Jesse. I'm all ears.
Yeah, I know. So I'm trying to think if there's any other things that like, but I mean, yeah, that's, there's always, it's interesting because Call of Duty is typically a kind of a level to level, like the mechanics are built for, custom to that level. And so usually it's like, oh, here's like this I don't know. I'm trying to think of something like here's this thing where we got to plant charges, and that's like a type of mechanic, or here's where you get to call in airstrikes, and that's like a particular mechanic, and those are all usually set per level. And I mean, we did a lot with Infinite Warfare. I got a lot of that out, man, because I was gameplay director on that game. I mean, we did all kinds of stuff. Like we had planned like side missions and with vehicle gameplay in them, and like full vehicle side missions, and we had like spider grenade mechanics, and we had like you could assume control of other robots, and we had all kinds of crazy stuff in that. So that's where we just kind of went wild with gameplay in terms of like what Call of Duty could do. Yeah, and that was really the point of Infinite Warfare, was we were sitting here going like, well, we want to do a bunch of like new gameplay in Call of Duty. Well, how can we do it? Well, what if we set it in space? And like we had some other ideas for settings, but space ended up being the one that like kind of like took off, and it's always interesting because I know that game like critically didn't get very well received for any number of reasons, but I'm actually really proud of it. I think like the single player turned out like really well.
Okay, I'm here to tell you, I've got to interrupt you here. I loved the single player campaign in Call of Duty Infinite Warfare.
That's awesome.
I was talking to Sean about it because Sean had called me up. And he wanted me to critique it, and I'm playing the game, and I'm like, dude, one of the things that I haven't told you about is with Call of Duty, I suck at multiplayer. Like, sure. I am the worst at Call of Duty multiplayer, but I love buying the games because of the cinematic, memorable moments, the scripting events, like what you're talking about, like just being able to be this soldier in this situation that's bigger than me, and I'm just I'm thrust into these different situations and whatnot. And Call of Duty Infinite Warfare was a bold step away from the safe zone, because just what you mentioned earlier in the program, Activision is looking at it as, okay, here's our safe area. Clearly, we have a bona fide hit on our hands. We could just keep churning out these kind of World War II-esque, they kind of went into modern warfare and that sort of thing. But we could just rinse and repeat this same type of scenario, and people will buy it simply because they just love Call of Duty.
Yep.
And for Infinite Warfare, man, like what a departure that was. I mean, just everything in the single player experience, I was glued. I was staying up till like 3 a.m. in the morning playing that game and was just absolutely riveted by not only like the storyline, the brand new types of gameplay mechanics that were introduced. Just because you're in space, it's a completely different paradigm altogether when you compare it to all the stuff that has happened before. And I'm killing myself right now because I cannot remember the name. What is the name of that cyborg that is helping you out?
Oh, Ethan.
Ethan. Oh my gosh, dude. Okay. Ethan is hands down one of my favorite like supportive characters in gaming, period. Like, I don't know who came up with Ethan, but Ethan
It was like a narrative team. They were like, yeah.
Kudos to whoever did that. Yeah. Because like I absolutely loved like even like with the game design, the game mechanics of that too. Just the way how he was able to come in at different critical moments and support you and that sort of thing. I mean, I could just totally take this whole entire interview over and just spill my guts about how much I enjoy that game. But please continue.
That's awesome. No, that's great. I love hearing it because like that's one of those games where it's like another one where we kind of killed ourselves and went through a lot of kind of craziness internally to get that game out the door. And and then like it was like that was a really kind of fascinating. It's like every game. I always tell people, it's like every game that I work on is just full of surprises. You can never predict anything that's going to happen, and so then you just get used to that mindset, and then you just become zen to it, I guess. But it's like that was one where when we did the big reveal, people were like, what is this? And they were kind of, it was almost like on the fence, but then we had this what was it, like the Bowie cover song that like turned a lot of people off, and then we got like the most disliked YouTube video of all time at that time or whatever, and that was just and you're sitting here trying to be like creative and make a good game, and you want to entertain people, but on the flip side you're seeing like people just get like bent out of shape over this, and it's like disheartening. It's like how do you kind of finish this game in a good way? And it almost becomes self-defeating because people are like less motivated now, and that kind of stuff. But
and it's tough because you have some of the most diehard, passionate fans out there that just absolutely love Call of Duty. They're obviously very opinionated, and you as a team, I mean, for them to have that type of response, I mean, it's totally expected of the fact that like it's going to take wind out of your sails, creatively speaking. But still, though, I mean. Dude,
we couldn't predict. Yeah, no, it was like I'm like, if I can have fun playing the single player, then we've succeeded. And like we came up with some really cool mechanics, and we kind of said like, hey, let's let people, like the design kind of angle was like, let people play through this kind of how they want to, and let them have all the tools at their disposal to be able to play it. So like if you want to chuck spider grenades, that's cool. If you want to have a shield that you can like play defense kind of your way through, that's cool too. If you want to almost play like a controller character and like assume control over like the robots, that's cool too. So we kind of approached it that way. And then we had all these like tech gadgets and stuff, like different types of grenades and things. Like we had like the was it like the shot grenades, so they like shoot electricity out and like, cause chain reactions and stuff.
Let me tell you, it worked, Jesse. I'm here to tell you that like that was a completely dynamic experience. Like I have nothing invested in this. I'm just an outsider playing the game. I loved how organic that whole thing was because I was switching to different grenade types on the fly. I was having fun with different types of scenarios where like I would be more like in an assault mode versus more just kind of playing along the outskirts and playing more defense and whatnot. Every one of those different components that you just mentioned, I'm totally playing it back in my head. I'm like, yeah, I remember doing that. I remember taking this, doing the shock grenades were awesome. And then of course also just like the little like, I don't even know what the correct terminology is, but like the cool like harpoon thing where you can like stick to an enemy and then like basically like you're skewering them with it, and then you can like move up toward them and shove them out of the way and that sort of thing. All that stuff is just badass.
Yeah, that was like a really, like we just kind of decided to go kind of wild with the mechanics. And like I said, that was all in part of like we'd come off. So when I went back to Infinity Ward, I was working on Call of Duty Ghosts. And so I shipped Call of Duty Ghosts. I was there for the last year of it basically. And, Ghost was like, kind of like, all right, are we going to just keep doing this now? Like, are we just going to keep doing like more of the same sort of thing? Like creatively it gets tiring, right? Cause you're like, well, what can we do differently this time? And it was like, what about a dog? You know, and that was kind of like the craziest thing we could come up with that was like new and innovative. But
I like the dog too.
Yeah, the dog worked out. But that was also one of those things where it kind of came on a little bit later and didn't get well integrated because of the way the studio was set up. Like at the time, Infinity Ward was very flat, and so there wasn't like a central governing kind of lead designer or anything like that. So like lead designers were just like working on more levels basically, and so people were just kind of left to make whatever they wanted for their level. But then they knew that they were doing a dog, so it didn't become like a game wide mechanic, right? It was like the dog, like Riley showed up in a few levels, and that was kind of it, you know. And it had like a little story, but then it just kind of petered out, you know. And Ghost is another kind of, again, like fascinating story in the way games are made, because that was 3 studios working on that game simultaneously, like Neversoft and Raven and Infinity Ward all kind of working co-equally on different parts of the game. And so that's probably why like a lot of the mechanics and sort of narrative didn't tie together as well as it should have, you know. And then when we went to Infinite Warfare, that's when we kind of changed everything. We merged Neversoft into Infinity Ward, and we went with a more like, you know, kind of classic like lead director structure. And then that's why you'll see like in Infinite Warfare, the narrative is like way better. Like it's like way, you know, it's well defined, and like, you know, characters have arcs, and there's like plot turns, you know, character turns and plot twists and all that kind of stuff. And then mechanically, like everything feels, you know, way more put together. Like you have side missions that were planned from the beginning, you know, and that you could like, you know, the ship assault missions that, you know, you could go on, or like the Jackal missions that are a completely other set of, you know, side missions. And like like I said, like the mechanics of like, you know, just the way the weapons and abilities are kind of, you could use them basically in any level at will. So, you know, there's like we were trying to do like upgrades and stuff and all that, but and like, I mean, we left some stuff on the cutting room floor of that one too. Like we were getting even more ambitious with like, you know, you were going to be able to collect like items from fallen enemies and use those as like ways to feed your like 3D printer back on the Retribution, right? And you know, upgrade your weapons and all that good stuff. But that like got cut like at the very last second. So we kind of had to like, you know, do a U-turn on some of that stuff and just get what we could out the door. But ultimately, I don't think it would have like made our Metacritic score any higher. You know, it was like we had enough trouble just getting that game out the door. It was a pretty ambitious game, and we kind of had to, you know, it was like, you know, I think we were just naive in a way. Like it was like, oh, it's a space game. We can just use space reference stuff, and we can just, you know, come up with whatever for art, and we'll figure it out. But when you're working on a traditional Call of Duty game, you know, you can draw reference from. You can just look outside and take pictures, right? You can just like, hey, there's a car. Let's just take that and let's make that car in the game. But when you're doing like a sci-fi game, you can't do that anymore. Like the length of time it takes to get an asset in game just goes up exponentially, because you have to concept it first, and then the concepts have to get approved, and it has to fit the art style that, you know, that makes sense for the universe that we're creating out of thin air, right? And then, you know, those assets have to get made, but then like, hey, they don't look exactly like the concept art because, again, you're not using photo reference. So it just took longer than we thought it would. And then there was a lot of just going back and forth. Like, what's the Jackal is like this like, you know, whatever. It's like there are, you know, because the game was really about like, it was kind of like we were trying to make it like Top Gun-ish in a way, you know, like it was like Top Gun in space, and you're like, you're like these like, you know, like fighter pilot jogging. But so anyway, the Jackal was really important to get to look right. Same thing with the Retribution, and that took like, I don't know, like a year. Like it was crazy. Like, so we were kind of constantly waiting for things to get done, and we started looking at the clock, and we're like, are we really going to make this game? Like, this is a pretty ambitious game, and you know, and I'm glad it got made. But you know, I mean, we had like another one another thing that happened was we had planned this whole seamless campaign. So sort of like how God of War did, or God of War 4 just did, where you kind of like don't never cut the camera, you know?
Right.
We had planned that from the beginning, and we had it working. And so you would go back. So like the like, this kind of goes back to our like original like Greenlight demo, which, man, I hope people get to see it one day. But we had this like whole seamless loop where, you know, you go, you're I'm trying to remember how it starts. You're on the ground in some city, and then you like these like spider robots attack like Paris or something crazy like that, and you're like, whoa, what is this? But it's all like everyone's talking like military speak, and it's very Call of Duty. And then this jackal flies in and like takes out the robot, and you're like, whoa, that was crazy. And then it like lands, and the canopy opens up, and it like starts talking to you, and you're like, what the F, you know? So you hop inside, and and then you do this like the cool like space shuttle launch into space, and you're like over Earth, and then you see like these like ships fighting in space over Earth, and they like warp away, and you're like, whoa, that's crazy. And then and then it's like, okay, well, get back to the Retribution. And you're like, what's a Retribution? And then you like turn your ship, and you like land your ship inside the Retribution, like all seamlessly. And then like the doors open up, and then you get out of the cockpit and walk around inside the ship, and you're like talking to people, and they're like addressing you as captain, and you're like, what is going on? Mm-hmm. And then they're telling you like, okay, they went to the Saturn, they went to Saturn, the moons of Saturn, let's go attack them. So you like go to your like ship computer at in the bridge, and you like punch in some stuff, and you like warp there. And then when you walk out of that, the armory guy was like right on the right. So the idea was that you would like, you would just kind of like just on your way out, just like go, gear up if you wanted to, and they would kind of maybe give you some mission briefing ideas, and like, here's what you might want to take, and so on. So we had this idea of an armorer guy. And then and then you just exited from there, get on the elevator, go down, get back in your jackal, fly back out into space again. This is all seamless. There's like it's all like hidden through like kind of like we're just unloading things behind you as doors shut, right. And then loading the next thing in front of you. And then and then you fly out into space, you get into a space battle, and then there was this big the big enemy ship that got away when it was over Earth, and then you like you attack it, you take out its like turrets and stuff, and then you get out in 0G, and this is where people are like, oh my god, I was like, when's the madness gonna end? Because now you're having 0G combat, and you're like flying around in 0G combat space with like we had this like hook thing that you could like pull yourself around with, like maybe that was like the harpoon thing you're talking about.
Yeah, that was it.
Like in 0G, yeah. And so we had the idea of like 0G combat, and then you'd fly into the ship, and then gravity would turn on as you went through these vents, and then you'd like take out whatever, like some guy inside, or no, I think you just like self-destructed the ship. And then you got back in your ship or your jackal at the end. It like came over to meet you because it had like AI. In the beginning, it was like very much. It was going to be like whatever, like Kit,
Mm-hmm.
like it was going to be like this like ship that like could like talk to you and stuff and would be your buddy. But we ended up not going down that path. But yeah, and then you get in it, and then you like fly off, and then like the demo level ended, and that's kind of like what sold the game like internally. And what's crazy about that is we actually this is what still bothers me to this day, is we tested that internally with Activision in like like we had it like what's it called, focus tested, and people were like, this is awesome, like and we went through a number of focus tests, and they were all like highly positive, and it was like, you guys need to make this game because of the reaction's so good. But kind of what ended up happening was, and we didn't realize this at the time, was, hey, this is a 3-year game, and people were asking us in those focus meetings, are like, oh, is this the new Call of Duty game? Is this coming out this year? Is this Advanced Warfare? And it was like, no, it's not. So then Advanced Warfare comes out and kind of gets people, the Call of Duty fans' heads around the idea of like of a sci-fi game. And people are kind of like, oh, this is, some people are like, hey, this is really good, but then you could start to see the cracks, and like people, like the fans going like, hey, this is maybe too much. And then Black Ops 3 comes out the next year, and it's like off the rails crazy, right? In terms of like sci-fi. And so then it comes to us, and we're like, okay, well, we're gonna do another sci-fi game. And by then, like the fans were like, hey, we just want like boots on ground. We just want it like that was cool, but we just want to go back to like, maybe like modern, or we want to go, something like that, like World War II, whatever. And so, and that's where you see like, Sledgehammer ended up doing a World War II game instead of like a sequel to Advanced Warfare. And like we came out, and it was basically like we thought we nailed the concept, but it just came out too late, and it was at the wrong time for like what the fans expected and stuff. So so that was like a huge bummer. But at the end of the day, it was like I said, it's like, just, I still like this game. Like I think it was, like, so I don't know. Well, that was a tough one.
And even what you just mentioned about how there are certain sensibilities that are shared with like the newest God of War game, because that was one of the coolest things. I'm currently making my way through God of War 4.
Yeah,
and I absolutely love how there was no camera break whatsoever. It's like you just play the game.
That's the dream.
And it is just it totally is like no loading screen. You were just playing it. And really, like just what you described, I mean, especially with Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, like I mean, even in the older games as well, but especially with Infinite Warfare, there was a lot of that. I remember that where you were going from sequence to sequence. There weren't any type of like loading screens that you'd have to wait for, and it was very much that organic experience of like, okay, you selected where you want to take the ship. Okay, now we're here, sir. We have these missions for you. Your ship is ready. Come right this way. You get into your ship. You take off. I mean, it by and large, I mean, it was, I would say, 90% seamless, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there just really wasn't anything I can think of that would break it.
We tried to, I mean, like we ended up covering the loads with like load movies, but you can't tell that they're load movies often. But then we ended up doing like straight up like third person, like, pre-rendered load movies to like get you to places. And that kind of like bridged a lot of those entries to levels. Like I don't know if you remember like the level Titan, like there's this whole drop seek. Yeah. And then it's like, hey, you're like dropping through the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. But originally that was like you were in the ship and you were having the whole discussion. Like all that dialogue was recorded and performance captured with like people sitting in like harnesses inside the ship. And then they ended up just like, we had, I can't remember the name of the studio, but we had like another production house in LA, like make the cutscenes with our assets. And then we just kind of used the audio that we had already recorded from the performance capture on top of that to kind of get the narrative going, so that when you landed, everything still made sense. But it was crazy, man. Like we were really ambitious on that one. And, like it's like the holy grail of like game design to have like a seamless game. And then I'm like, God of War did it. It's like Corey. Jealous. yeah it's hard, man. That one's hard. Everything has to really fit together just perfectly to get that to happen, because usually you have so many other bigger problems, and so that's like the cherry on top. And so it's like we didn't get the cherry on top, but it's all good.
Now, I'd like to take a step back a bit. Before you became gameplay director for Infinite Warfare, you actually left the world of Call of Duty. I know you mentioned this actually briefly earlier in the program, but you started to work on Halo 4 for 343 Industries. I'd like to be able to talk a bit about that. Starting off with just, I guess, what caused you to decide to leave COD and work on Halo 4?
Sure. So this is like when I talk about like emotional, things, it's like, basically what happened at Treyarch. So, here I am, I like made Zombies, with a bunch of other people. And, but because I had kind of done it, there was like this other, it was like this bunker defense thing was happening. And I was like, no, it should be zombie mode. This is gonna be really cool. There was kind of like a bit of like back and forth there with like myself and the production team. And so they were kind of like, he's going a bit rogue. I don't know. And so they weren't like they weren't super stoked about it. And then, I put this Easter egg in my level that, this is always funny because depending on like, if Activision production tells you like, we didn't know about it, but I like literally told like producers about this, but, that I like hit an Easter egg in my level. And so in the paleo level, if you go to these like 3 pools on the beach and you like wait in long enough in each one, when you go to the last one, these like statues come up out of the grounds, or like boxer dogs, like, and they have ray guns in their mouth, like the zombie ray guns are in their mouth. And that was kind of like a nod to like zombie mode, like it like tied me to the zombie mode basically. But so then you would have these ray guns in like this serious Call of Duty level, and you're like shooting, you're shooting Japanese soldiers, and they're like jibbing, and they're like turning into blood mist with this like green ray gun. But so it's like this really crazy Easter egg I put in, and I did it with like one of the audio directors, and so apparently it didn't work its way all the way up the chain, and so it like never got formally approved, but it shipped. So I'm sitting here on my break after the game ships, and I get this phone call. They're like, "Hey, come into the office and we need to talk to you." I was like, "Okay, like whatever."
Yeah, those are always
it's probably
fun.
A bug or something. Well, I'm sitting here thinking like, "Oh, I got to fix a bug, or there's some problem with zombies or something." And then they're like, "Hey, did you put this in?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Okay, we need to have a serious chat." And it turned into one of those, right, where I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I'm about to get fired for this." And And then, so they weren't happy about that. And the reason they weren't happy was because we decided to repurpose some Japanese dialogue, but the audio director flipped the dialogue. So he reversed the dialogue and he put a bunch of reverb on it. So it sounded really like kind of spooky, like, you know.
Sure.
And they were like, why did you put devil speak in the game? And I was like, what are you talking about? This is all approved. Like, this is all legally approved dialogue. Like, it's already cleared. Like, you know, like the audio director already like approved it and everything. And then
you should have turned around on them and go like, how do you know what devil speak sounds like?
Right? Yeah, that's like literally what they told me. It was crazy. I was like, oh man, I'm like something like this is insane. But so then it was all fine. But I think that like made them upset, you know, and they still blame me for it or whatever. So. And then keep in mind, like up to this point, we have a lot of folks leaving Treyarch because they're just tired of the crunch and they're you know, they're not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and they're kind of like something I didn't really get into much, but you know, when we merged with Treyarch was a very like kind of engineering and production heavy studio. And they're also close to Activision, so a lot of producers. And then Gray Matter was a very like design driven and art driven studio. So there's going to be some like friction there. And that friction basically came to a head at the end of World at War. And you know, people just started leaving. They were just tired of it. They didn't think they could affect the culture enough or whatever. So they a lot of them went to Infinity Ward and started working on Modern Warfare 2. Some of them went to like id and stuff like that. But yeah, so I'm trying to think what happened next. So then so a lot of those folks left. I was kind of left by myself essentially with like, because I was part of this OG crew from Gray Matter, and I was like one of the few, if not the last remaining member there. And I have like basically my, you know, bosses are upset at me because I've added stuff to the game kind of against their will in various ways. You know, even though I'm doing it in the best interest of the game, it's kind of going against certain production plans and stuff. And so they were just kind of upset with me. And then when the next, you know, we started working on the next game, which ended up being Black Ops 1. And it is something I really don't talk to a lot of people about, but in Black Ops 1, it was going to be, you know, and it ended up being like this kind of Vietnam heavy game. And my like wife's mom's fiance was killed in Vietnam. So I was like, I don't know if I don't feel comfortable working on a game that has like Vietnam kind of themes in it, you know, and stuff. And so I just kind of looked at like all the things that were lining up and you know, and Zombies, you know, when they put me on zombie stuff, they actually kind of pushed me out of the creative side. They were like, hey, we just want you to like work on this level and come up with some stuff for the level, but we're going to take it over from here. And that was like disheartening, you know, personally. And I didn't take that well either. So that's when I started trying to figure out like how I could get out of the situation. And, you know, and I'd been crunched so much and I kind of at the time, like mentally had tied Los Angeles and crunching together. So I was just like, I'm just done with this. And, you know, and I wanted to go back home, basically go back to like Oregon or, you know, the Northwest. And so, yeah, I happened to be like, it was like one of those random things where I was walking to coffee one day and I met this lady who was she used to be a recruiter at Treyarch, and then she became a recruiter at Microsoft. And she was like, hey, like and it's crazy. Like her and I have these like weird connections, but so she was like, hey, I went to Microsoft and, you know, and you know, you're really good and stuff. And they're looking to start up this Halo studio. And it's, at the time it was going to be like this third person game. And I think like Peter Jackson was involved or something. And it was like this narrative driven thing. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, what is this? And so, I was like, you know, pretty interested, and it was like a good way to kind of get out of the situation I was in and grow and learn about different games, you know, because up that point I'd only designed Call of Duty games. And so I was looking for just any kind of change, you know, and that's, you know, part of the reason why I did Zombies anyway. It was like, hey, I want to just do something different.
That wraps up this episode of Joygasm. Make sure you tune in next week when we continue where we left off with Jesse in part 2 of this interview. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to check out patreon.com/Joygasm and pledge $1 a month for exclusive access to the show. Also, you can follow us on social media and YouTube. Just do a search for Joygasm TV. In addition to iTunes and Android, you can listen to our podcast on TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Spotify, and SoundCloud.com/Joygasm TV. Last but not least, search Joygasm TV on Twitch to see us stream our gaming adventures live every Wednesday night at 9:30 p.m. Central Time. We'll see you next time.